Rejoice! Today, I'm finally gonna talk about Hotline Miami. One of my favorite games of all-
Talking about Hotline Miami today.
What?
I'm talking about Hotline Miami.
Well then what are we gonna talk about?
Katana Zero.
Alright. I mean, fuck it. It's basically the same thing. Kupo! Alright, now, that was a little mean. It's not the same thing, but it wears its influences on its sleeve, let's just say. Recently, I've been playing Katana Zero, which is a game that's a lot like Hotline Miami. How, you ask? Well, you play as an assassin who moves through intricately designed buildings, killing gangsters, and you can only take one hit, and it's super difficult, and the whole thing is themed like 80s, and there's like neon, it's kind of like an Outrun sort of thing, and there's pumping electronic music in the background, and it's very violent, and there's blood. And each of these levels is framed within a story where the character forms a relationship with a female character, and after each job, he goes back to his dirty, sad apartment. That's something the kids these days are calling a big mood. Anyways, look, like, you get it. It's Hotline Miami, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not derogatory for me to say that. It's very obviously inspired by the thing. So let's just get that out of the way, because we need to talk about something. So in Hotline Miami, it was a fairly linear story. There weren't a lot of choices to make, if any, in the first game. I think the second game had some choice stuff, but I only played the second game one time because I didn't like it as much as the first. But that's not what this video is about. Katana Zero rests a lot more of its impact upon its narrative than Hotline Miami ever did. The interstitials have a certain pacing to them, like your movement is restricted, for example. In Hotline Miami, the interstitial scenes played almost exactly like the murder scenes. But in Katana Zero, you're slowly walking around talking to characters, moving throughout different buildings, more often than not talking to your therapist who gives you mission. But there's an interesting mechanic inside of these things. In Hotline Miami, there was dialogue that you would have with other characters, but it was presented more so as a normal cutscene. In Katana Zero, it's presented as an interactive dialogue that you can have, a la Telltale game. Dialogue a la Telltale game down to the fact that you're making choices, and there's a timer, which is a key aspect to the dialogue system in Katana Zero. There are two different portions of the timer each time you're having dialogue in Katana Zero. We'll call it a safe section and an unsafe section just for clarity's sake. The unsafe section of the timer is usually the first part of the timer. That's when another character is speaking, and you're given two different dialogue options, which are usually going to be rude, that you can use to interrupt the other character who's speaking. Something like, fuck you, or shut up. But if you're patient enough and you wait until the timer gets to the safe section, you're given the quote-unquote correct answers to the conversation, to the questions, the cooperative and the safe things to say to somebody else. Thank you, I'll be going now, or whatever. Just as an example, the main character has an addiction to a drug and he talks to his therapist who gives him a dosage of said drug. While your therapist is droning on and on about your diagnoses, you can tell him, shut up, I want my drug, and you can cut him off, which leads to interesting interactions, and then he eventually will give you your drug. Or you can wait patiently for him to give you his whole spiel, and then eventually he will just say, thank you for being cooperative today, here is your drug. And I think that gives the player some really great agency over how they want the character to act within a scene. So basically, it supports the gameplay, and it supports the thematic elements, or just the story in general, through gameplay. Katana Zero is a game about experiencing time in interesting ways, and forcing a player into tedium is really a great way to put a player into that character's shoes. When in the murder scenes, they're running around slashing and shooting dudes normally, but making them sit down and listen to a therapist talk about psychology is a great way to make the player empathize with what the character is going through. They want to get back to the murder, and they don't want to have to listen to this guy talk anymore. The action moves fast, but everything else requires patience, which is important to the game's story. The tedium here isn't just for tedium's sake. It's integral, and I think that's really special. And it's not like this is anything revolutionary. Games have been utilizing enforced tedium for a long time. Take a look at something that Uncharted 2 was lauded for. The Tibet scene, which comes after the midpoint, I haven't played Uncharted 2 since like 2012? I haven't played Uncharted 2 in a long, long time, and I know that the Tibet scene maybe comes after the train scene. Anyways, it was lauded for having such a slow and thoughtful moment come after such a massive and epic, bombastic set piece. Nathan Drake was forced to walk slowly and pet animals, which was very different from the rest of the gameplay, and made the shooting feel all the more impactful once you got back to it. In an instance that has nothing to do with structured narrative, look at the way that tedium is handled in open world sandbox crafting games like Minecraft or Rust. Specifically, you'll find it in the loop of gathering and crafting, creating resources and expending them. A player who spent all day looking for diamonds is going to be a lot more hesitant to use those resources than a player who just made stuff out of wood, for example. It makes the moments of spending those resources and finding new ones all the more impactful. It also provides player with an ever-looming sense of dread that eventually they will run out of resources and they're going to have to find new sources. Another example of this is weapon durability in games like Breath of the Wild, which a lot of people had criticisms of Breath of the Wild for, which might be valid, but I personally find the weapon durability system in the game to be really special because of this concept. It forces the player to complete combat scenarios in interesting ways or to avoid them altogether without breaking all of their weapons. It also kind of flies in the face of everything we know about RPGs and action games in general, where you're supposed to care about your weapons. In Breath of the Wild, they're disposable, they're trash, they're garbage. Break them if you want. The tedium of ensuring you have good weapons and finding new ones creates poignance to the battles. It makes them feel scary because you know that eventually, even if you win the fight, you're going to have to spend some time licking your wounds and recuperating from it. Again, it's expending resources and collecting them. It's not all that different. Animal Crossing, my favorite video game of all time, is a game literally built around experiencing tedium. It's basically the best adaptation of what it feels like to watch slice of life anime. The Sims is another thing just like this. You're just watching people live their lives. There's not a whole lot interesting about it unless you're really into designing houses, which I'm not, so maybe that's why I never got anything out of The Sims, but also because I'm pretty bad at it and I always die. Red Dead 2, a game that I didn't necessarily love. I got into that in my Game of the Year video last year, but I certainly appreciate the game for its audacity in going, hey, no, you're a cowboy, it's kind of boring, so you're going to have to deal with that. It thematically supports Arthur Morgan's character arc. He's a cowboy, and he goes out in the woods, and he has to skin animals, and it's all there. Forcing a player to be bored isn't necessarily a bad thing. Again, it provides poignance to when there is a big shootout because you just spent the last 5 hours fishing and hunting animals quietly in the woods. The car in Final Fantasy 15. It isn't fun to drive manually. In fact, when you do get the ability to do so, you realize you're kind of still stuck on a track and you can't really do much with the car. So you pretty much are just forced to set the car on the road and watch it drive for 15 minutes. So you might as well get up and get a drink. But I think that really reinforces the feeling of being on a road trip and having to sit in the back seat. Whether or not you think that's a good, valuable thing to have to spend your time on is up to you, of course, but I think these things reinforce the ludonarrative elements of the game, and it's special for that. Which is why I absolutely love the dialogue system in Katana Zero. I haven't finished the game, but I'm still playing through it, and when I step away from it, it's the thing I think about the most. As the game starts flirting with the idea of making sure that you know you have an unreliable narrator and that time isn't necessarily what it might seem, it starts doing some really interesting things with that. There's one scene in particular that I can think of, but I don't really want to spoil it here. I kind of just wanted to make a quick video saying, hey, Katana Zero isn't just a Hotline Miami clone. It does some really interesting things, and primarily that thing being taking control of its own story and forcing players to experience it in the same way that the character does. it's not an element of the game that I see getting talked about a lot. So I just wanted to highlight it. It was a game I was looking forward to for a long time, and while I thought it was just going to be another Hotline Miami fix, I'm pretty pleasantly surprised to see that I'm more interested in the story at the end of the day than the gameplay. Now, I don't know if that's an indictment of the gameplay or what, but I do think about the story a lot more than I think about the design of those levels, for example, which you can't really say the same about Hotline Miami IMO. Also, there's like some forced stealth stuff in Katana Zero that I think is not very good. So yeah, go check out the Katana Zero. If you like any of the things that I listed in those other games for the reasons that I listed them, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with it. It's not just a Hotline Miami clone. It does something very specifically, very differently, and I think it's really special for that, and I think it should be recognized for it. Kupo! 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 Kupo!